My name is Calvin Chin, and I'm a graphic design major in the College of Fine Arts. No, I'm not a waiter. I've been told that I look like one, but maybe later at dinner I'll be there. My advisor for this project is Nicholas Rock, and he is one of my professors in the College of Fine Arts, and he's been really helpful. So today, we're going to be talking about clothing and the way that we use it to create ideas about one's gender. So first, what is gender? Ooh, mystical question. When we talk about gender, we have to talk about sex. They are often confused as being really similar, but they're distinct. So when we talk about sex, we're talking about the biological differences between what we define as a man and a woman. And when we talk about gender, we are describing cultural, psychological, and social layers of associations that are placed on these two categories. They're often seen as the binary. And we're talking about behaviors and associations that describe what it means to be a man and be a woman, and what it means to act like one or look like one, etc. So for example, we have two icons here. I don't know if you've ever seen these before, but they're clearly gendered icons. And the way we've defined them, for example, the one on the left, we've drawn this trapezoid skirt dress to define that that's a woman, and the one on the right is a man. We also use color as a way to describe gender. So pink is seen as a feminine color, whereas blue is seen as masculine. And that wasn't always the case, but it is definitely today. And from childhood, we even gender our toys with Barbie dolls or with footballs. In advertising too, these are two similar products by the same company, but clearly gendered. The one on the left is pink with flower petals and the words lush and smooth. The one on the right is pro and power with the battery included, but both are extremely tacky nonetheless, but apparently they work. Even television and media, we have The Bachelor and the NFL, and the list goes on. And with music too, there are associations with who should be watching and consuming this media, etc. So these socially constructed codes, they influence the way we form our identities. They influence our interactions with one another, and they also structure the larger societal hierarchies that exist. And it's problematic when gender is used to justify why we tend to favor an ideal man or masculinity or hegemonic masculinity over femininity. And that's where I'm starting to look at clothes as something that I'm interested in, because it's a very visual representation of one's identity, one's expression, whether or not you might take that for granted, but the choices that we make in the clothes that we wear do express something about our identities. So for example, very clear gendered pieces of clothing. The one on the left is a skirt, the one on the right is a suit jacket. They're not just pieces of fabric, they all have social and political weight to them. So my project is exploring the intersection of these social constructs as well as aesthetics for both the individual wearers or the fashion designers and the identities of the people who are wearing this clothing, and how they relate to gender and clothing. So the concept that I'm trying to explore and trying to build is a digital experience that archives the progression of Western fashion from the 1950s to present. Because I think it would be helpful to look at fashion in the context of time and watch how it's evolved in correlation to social movements, or with the rise and fall of different celebrities or economic growth, etc. So there are three overarching concepts that I'm looking at. The first is that I'm looking to borrow from the physical museum experience. I was really inspired by a trip that I took to the New Whitney Museum, where they curated the entire exhibition chronologically from the top floor down. And I think it'd be interesting to take that experience and then try and recontextualize it into a web digital experience. And it's interesting to think about how you're confined in a physical space and how you view content and consume it, but then translate that to this amorphous, infinite space. Which leads to the second point, which is that I'm trying to look at gender as not just a binary, but also a more fluid concept. And so if you're in a website and you're looking at something, you can be transported to another image or another place instantly, whereas in a physical museum, you're navigating a physical space that you're bound to. And lastly, I'm interested in developing a narrative. This is something that has been personal to me as I've grown as a designer. And so I'm looking to curate content in a way that could tell a story about how fashion has been changing and how people have been changing in response to that as well. So to do this, I've designed a system and a process to just help facilitate the design process. The first is to define the content. The second is to develop a visual design that enhances that. And the last is to determine the flow of how this content will be. So for content, I've been looking mostly at the fashion industry as it relates to larger pop culture. I think that these figures are highly visible and they have an impact on societal perceptions, but they are just as important as the normal whoever on the street who's wearing whatever they choose to wear, and they're as important as the social movements that shape these people as well. For visual cues, I kept it very straightforward by referencing again the color codes of blue and pink, and I tried to include subtle effects like a small blurring motion that is just a nod to the idea of blurred gender lines. For the flow, I wanted to present this interface first with the familiar binary of menswear and womenswear, and when the user starts to interact with the content, it becomes a non-linear experience. So starting at point A will not get you directly to point B. You might be familiar with seeing menswear pieces of clothing, but then all of a sudden you're presented with womenswear and back and forth, which I think promotes this idea of a fluid story and a fluid concept. So I've created a few mock-ups that have animations with how a user might interact with this, and I'll try and explain as we go along. So here, there are two rooms. The first is menswear, the second is womenswear. On the bottom is a timeline spanning from 1950 all the way to present. So in this case, the user has chosen to explore menswear. So there are a series of images here presented around the idea of menswear in the 1950s, as well as text information to contextualize what's being presented. At this time in the 1950s, it was all about conforming, and there was a sense of the three-piece suit becoming an ideal or idealized outfit for the working man, the middle-class man, etc. So when the user highlights one of the images, the other objects are blurred. And then clicking that presents more images. In this case, Coco Chanel is presented in the context, again, of menswear, a very important designer who introduced the first women's suit at a time when women were entering the workforce in increasing numbers. So the suit became, started to have more political weight to it by empowering women and creating new female identities. So now clicking Coco Chanel takes you to womenswear, more images again. And clicking that, further along the timeline, now there's David Bowie, and then here is Yves Saint Laurent's Le Smoking tuxedo, which was created, again, for women and taking from menswear and happening at a time around second wave feminism. And the sentiment of the time was that for women, it was that if a man can wear that, why can't I? So again, items of clothing, but holding a lot of weight in terms of the meaning. So clicking that, back to David Bowie, an incredible figure who played a lot with identity and with appearance publicly. And clicking on him will now take you back to menswear. Here's Jean-Paul Gaultier's 1980s show titled literally Men in Skirts. It was really controversial, which is interesting to think about in this time period because with women, they were able to borrow from menswear, but there was a lot of controversy from the other way around. And then clicking there, the user can also manipulate the timeline just as a way to browse through this interface and to fast forward, in this case, to the present, where we have a transgendered model, Hareen Neff, who is able to walk both menswear and womenswear shows. In this case, it's a menswear show, Gucci. So what are the applications for creating something like this, besides just being personally interested in how fashion has changed over time? Well, I'm interested again in functioning as almost like an author. There's this idea of designer as author, creating experiences that have narratives to them, communicating stories, being a storyteller. And I'm also really enjoying the process of using websites and digital media as a means to explore this, because it relates really well to the content, which is about gender fluidity and breaking down social norms. So having this wide open space and infinite realm to kind of build an experience around is a very enticing idea or opportunity. And also it's a chance for me to use design to respond to my own social environment and to larger social issues. Design is powerful, and I think the more we as designers start to explore our own voices as they relate to social issues, the more enjoyment we get out of this process and the more change that we can have as well. So I've just replayed the entire animation here, but thank you for your time, and if you have any questions.
Phenomenal from the educational and historical sort of background. Do you think that sort of commercial enterprises, so stores, would incorporate something like this onto their online websites as a way of even increasing sales by having people sort of move back and forth between departments?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting topic because there are stores that are kind of delving into this. Not so much rethinking their online retail experience, but I know like Selfridges has introduced genderless floors, completely removing that. And this kind of functions, again, borrowing from museums where it's contextualizing these images more for art or for viewing versus consumerism or for shopping. But I think it would be interesting for stores to start to rethink their own shopping experience. I don't need to see just menswear and womenswear. Maybe there's a blend. Actually, there is a designer, Rad Harani, who builds just unisex clothing, like specifically unisex, and his retail experience is built around that. There's always men and women or figures paired together as you look through the clothing, not just sections.
What do you think of like Zara's new unisex line? I feel like it was kind of a controversy.
Yeah, so that's a problematic situation when it's easy for, I think, women to borrow from menswear. So the Zara line is essentially just menswear, and it's like a t-shirt and jeans. But there's never a situation when men are freely wearing skirts or situations like that, Yeah.
Is this actually available for us to navigate through online somewhere?
It currently is not, but I can definitely work. I'm very interested in building this into a real thing, but for this presentation, I've created the mock-ups. Yeah.
I was wondering if blurring of gender lines is also related to the increasing sort of casual nature of American clothing, where before people had very formal roles and now people are all mostly wearing casual wear?
Absolutely. I think it's a really exciting time when we think about fashion today because we are really not confined as much, and a lot of us are young people and older people as well are exploring personal identities and how fashion can be used to express personal identities versus fitting into certain conformed images.